My name is Elias Voss, and for 9 years I worked as a backcountry ranger in the southern wilderness of Alaska, in a place most maps softened into green emptiness. They called it Creepypasta. The name looked harmless on paper. A narrow cut between black spruce ridges, glacier-fed creeks, old hunting trails, cabins abandoned before I was born. Valleys so quiet your own breathing felt like trespassing. Tourists came there every summer because the brochures lied beautifully. They promised silence. They promised untouched wilderness. They promised bears, wolves, moose, eagles, northern lights, and photographs that would make people back home jealous. They never mentioned the parts we did not put in the brochures. The missing hikers, the mutilated animals, the trees that looked scratched by something standing too high on 2 legs. The nights when the forest went completely silent, not like peace, but like every living thing had been warned. I learned early that Alaska does not hate you. That would be easier. Hatred has direction. Alaska is worse. It is indifferent. It will let you freeze, bleed, drown, starve, or vanish without ever changing its expression. By September, the season was dying. The tourists had mostly gone home. The mosquitoes were fading. The nights were coming earlier. Snow had begun to gather in dirty patches beneath the shaded trees. That was when the first call came in. 4 tourists missing near Blackjaw Creek. 2 couples from Oregon. Names Mason Reed, Claire Reed, Tessa Vale, and Dorian Pike. They had rented a satellite beacon from the ranger station, signed the trail register, smiled through expensive rain jackets, and asked me the same question tourists always asked. Any bears out there? I told them yes. I told them to keep food sealed, make noise on blind bends, and not leave the marked trail after dusk. Mason laughed and said, "We're not stupid." I remember that clearly. People always say something like that before the wilderness corrects them. They were supposed to return Sunday morning. By Sunday afternoon, their rental truck was still at the trailhead. By Sunday evening, their beacon had not moved for 19 hours. By Monday morning, I was sent in with a search team. There were 6 of us. Me, Deputy Nolan Hask, who had spent most of his career breaking up bar fights and pretending he was not afraid of the woods. June Mercer, a wildlife biologist with calm hands and eyes that missed nothing. Patrick Soule, a volunteer tracker who carried an old lever-action rifle and spoke mostly to his dog. His dog was named Riggs, a scarred black and white Alaskan husky with 1 torn ear and the kind of intelligence that made people uncomfortable. The last 2 were rescue volunteers. Avery Cole, young, nervous, always checking her radio. And Bram Holt, large, quiet, former military, the kind of man who looked useful until fear found him. The air was wet and cold when we entered the trees. Low clouds dragged across the ridges like torn wool. The trail into Blackjaw Creek was muddy from 3 days of rain. Boot prints showed clearly at first. For sets going in. No sets coming out. That was the first bad sign. The second was the smell. Not rot. Not yet. Something heavier. Wet iron. Split stomach. Animal musk. Riggs smelled it before any of us did. He stopped at the first bend in the trail, lowered his head, and made a sound I had never heard from him before. Not a bark. Not a growl. A quiet, broken whine. Patrick tightened his grip on the leash. "What is it, boy?" Riggs backed away from the bend. That dog had tracked wounded bear through alder thickets. He had crossed frozen creeks and crawled into drainage tunnels after lost children. But at Blackjaw Creek, he refused to move forward. Nolan saw it and tried to laugh. "Great. Dog's smarter than us." Nobody answered. We followed the smell. 50 yards past the bend, we found the first body. At first I thought it was a deer. That is what my mind chose because it needed 1 more second of mercy. The shape was wrong, twisted under a fallen spruce, legs bent backward, clothing shredded into wet strips. Then I saw the hiking boot. Then the hand. It was Dorian Pike. His torso had been opened from sternum to pelvis. Not torn randomly. Opened. The ribs were spread apart as if something had forced both hands into him and pulled. His organs were gone. Not scattered. Gone. His face was still there, turned sideways into the mud, eyes packed with rainwater. Avery vomited beside the trail. Bram whispered, "Bear." June crouched near the body but did not touch it. "No." Nolan looked at her. "What do you mean, no?" She pointed at the ribs. "Brown bear crushes. Tears. Feed's messy. This is different. Patrick had one hand over Riggs's muzzle because the dog had started shaking. I looked at the trees. There were marks on the spruce above the body. Deep grooves cut into the bark. 5 lines. Too wide for bear claws. Too high for a wolf. 7 feet above the ground. Maybe higher. Nolan followed my gaze. Bear standing up, he said. He wanted it to be true so badly, I almost let him keep it. But then June found the camera. It was half buried in mud near Dorian's open hand. A small waterproof camera, cracked but intact. I wiped the lens with my sleeve and turned it on. The battery indicator blinked red. There were 32 images. Smiling faces at the trailhead. Claire holding up a thermos. Tessa balancing on a log. Mason pretending to flex in front of a glacier view. Then the images changed. Blurred shots of trees. A dark shape between trunks. Another blur. Then one photograph that made all of us stop breathing. It showed Mason standing in the trail at dusk, looking behind him. Past his shoulder, far back in the trees, something stood upright. Not clear. Not close. Just a black vertical shape among the spruce. Too tall. Too thin at the waist. The head was wrong. Longer than a man's. The ears were points. The image cut off below the chest. Nolan said, "That's a person in a hood." But his voice had lost strength. June took the camera from me carefully. Could be distortion. Could be, I said. I did not believe it. We marked Dorian's body and kept moving because 3 people were still missing. The forest changed after that. Not visibly. The trees were still trees. The creek still moved under gray stones. Rain still clicked softly on dead leaves. But every sound seemed delayed. Every branch snap made us turn too quickly. The trail descended toward Blackjaw Creek, where the missing beacon signal waited. Half a mile down, we found Mason's backpack hanging from a branch. Not caught. Hung. The straps had been wrapped around a limb 10 feet up. Bram stared at it. How the hell did it get up there? Patrick looked at Riggs. Riggs would not look at the pack. Nolan raised his shotgun and scanned the trees. "Hey," he shouted. "If someone's out there, this is the Alaska State Troopers. Show yourself." The forest swallowed his voice. No echo. No birds. No squirrel chatter. Nothing. Avery whispered, "Why is it so quiet?" June answered without turning, "Because everything else knows more than we do." At the creek crossing, we found the second body. Claire Reed was tied to a birch tree with strips of her own jacket. Her feet barely touched the ground. Her head hung forward. Her hair was frozen into dark ropes against her cheeks. At first, from a distance, she looked alive. That was the cruelty of it. For 1 second, we all thought we had found a survivor. Then the wind moved her. Her chest had been bitten open near the collarbone. Not eaten like Dorian. Bitten. The wound was deep enough to show white bone beneath torn muscle. Her right arm was missing below the elbow. The stump was ragged and black-red. But her face was untouched. Her eyes were open. And someone had placed a small pile of animal bones at her feet. Fox bones, rabbit bones, bird skulls, a warning, or an offering. Avery began crying silently. Nolan cut Claire down with shaking hands. Bram kept saying, "This is a man. This is a sick man." June examined the rope of jacket fabric. "No knife cuts," she said. "It was torn." Nolan snapped, "People can tear cloth. Not like this." Patrick suddenly cursed. Riggs had slipped his collar. The dog ran across the creek, splashing through black water, and disappeared between the spruce. "Riggs!" Patrick screamed. He started after him. I grabbed his arm. "Patrick, no. That's my dog. Then don't make him watch you die." He looked at me with hate. I let him hate me. It was better than letting him run blind into that forest. Then Riggs screamed. I had heard dogs yelp. I had heard dogs howl. I had heard dogs caught in traps. This was different. It was almost human. It rose from somewhere beyond the creek, sharp and tearing, then ended too quickly. Patrick made a sound like his heart had been pulled out. He raised his rifle and ran. Bram followed. Nolan shouted after them. "Stop. Stay together." They did not. I chased because letting the group split was worse than fear. June and Avery came behind me. Across the creek, the ground climbed into a dense stand of spruce and alder. The branches were tight, wet, and sharp. Visibility dropped to 15 feet. Patrick was ahead, calling Riggs's name until his voice broke. We found the dog's collar first. It lay in the moss. The leather had been pulled apart, not unbuckled. No blood. That was somehow worse. Then Bram shouted. We found Riggs 20 yards farther in. Parts of him. His body had been forced into the hollow base of a dead tree. His hind legs stuck out stiffly. His spine had been bent at an angle no living thing should bend. Patrick dropped to his knees. He did not scream. He did not cry. He just placed both hands on the ground and lowered his forehead into the moss. Then something moved above us. Not in front. Above. Branches shifted. Snow fell from a spruce limb. Nolan fired once into the canopy. The blast slammed through the trees and rolled across the creek. Avery screamed. June ducked. Something heavy landed behind us. We all turned. For one fragment of a second, I saw nothing but trees. Then I saw breath. A pale cloud rising from behind a spruce trunk. Higher than mine. Higher than Nolan's. Higher than any man's. Then it was gone. Not running. Not crashing. Just gone. Patrick stood slowly. His face had changed. He raised his rifle. Where is it? Patrick, I said quietly. Lower the gun. Where is it? You won't hit what you can't see. He laughed once. It was an ugly sound. You think I care? That was when the radio crackled. Avery grabbed hers so fast she nearly dropped it. Base, this is Search Team 3. We have 2 confirmed dead, 1 animal casualty, possible hostile. The radio answered with static. Then a voice came through. Faint. Wet. Almost buried under interference. Help. Avery froze. Say again? Help me. Claire's voice. Avery went pale. Nolan stared at Claire's body across the creek. She was dead. We all knew she was dead. The radio hissed again. Elias. My name came through in Claire Reed's voice. I felt my stomach drop. The others turned to me. Avery whispered, How does it know your name? Nobody had an answer. The radio popped. Then Mason Reed's voice came through. Don't let it wear us. The transmission ended. After that, we should have left. We should have carried the dead we could carry, marked the rest, and retreated to the trailhead. We should have returned with helicopters, rifles, dogs, and men who believed in nothing except firepower. But Tessa Vale and Mason Reed were still missing. And I was still a ranger. That is the stupidest sentence a man can say before he gets people killed. We moved toward the beacon. The signal was close now. Less than a quarter mile. The ground rose sharply through a narrow ravine locals called Wolf Ladder, though wolves rarely used it. The walls were dark rock slick with moss. The trees leaned inward from both sides, making a tunnel of branches overhead. We found blood on the stones. Not drops. Smears. Handprints. Mason had come this way alive. His fingers had left red streaks along the rock wall. Beside them were other marks. Long scratches. Deep. Parallel. At shoulder height. Then above shoulder height. Then higher. As if something had climbed the ravine walls using claws and watched him crawl below. Avery was breathing too fast. I can't do this. Nolan said, Yes, you can. No. No, I can't. This isn't a rescue anymore. She's right, June said. Nolan turned on her. We leave people behind now. June looked at him coldly. We may already be carrying the thing that killed them closer to the next victim. Nobody spoke after that. At the top of Wolf Ladder, we found Tessa. She was alive. That was the worst part. She sat in the snow beneath a leaning spruce, wrapped in a silver emergency blanket. Her lips were blue. Her eyes were wide. Her hands were pressed over her ears. The beacon lay beside her, blinking red. Tessa, I said. She did not look at me. Tessa, my name is Elias. I'm a ranger. We're here to get you out. Her mouth moved. No sound came out. June knelt in front of her. Where is Mason? Tessa began to shake. Her teeth clicked together. Then she whispered, It learned him. I crouched beside June. What does that mean? Tessa looked at me for the first time. Her pupils were huge. It watched us all night. It stayed behind the trees and said things. Nolan swallowed. What things? My mother's voice. Claire's laugh. Dorian coughing. Mason calling from the wrong direction. Avery covered her mouth. Tessa continued. It would not come into the firelight. It just walked around us. Around and around. We could hear the feet. Feet. I asked. She nodded slowly. 2 feet. Then 4. Then 2 again. Patrick raised his rifle toward the trees. Tessa flinched violently. No guns, she whispered. It likes when you shoot. Bram said, Where is Mason? Tessa pointed behind us. Nobody turned at first. We all understood that pointing behind someone in a place like that was its own kind of attack. Then I looked. Mason Reed stood between 2 black spruce trees. He was about 40 yards away. His jacket was torn. His face was gray. Blood covered the lower half of his body. But he was standing. Mason! Nolan shouted. Mason did not answer. He lifted one hand. Slowly, like a man waving from underwater. Tessa began making a small desperate sound. No. 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 Mason took 1 step forward. Something was wrong with the step. His knees bent badly. His shoulders sagged. His head hung too far to one side. June whispered, Elias. I raised my rifle but did not aim at him. Mason, stop there. He stopped. The forest behind him seemed darker than the forest around him. Mason, I said. Say something. His mouth opened. Claire's voice came out. Help me. Avery screamed. Nolan fired. The shot hit Mason in the chest. He collapsed backward into the snow. For 2 seconds, no one moved. Then Mason's body was pulled sideways. Fast. Too fast. Not dragged by gravity. Not dragged by a man. Yanked. He vanished behind the trees. Then the forest began to laugh. Not one voice. Several. Claire. Dorian. Mason. Riggs howling beneath them. Patrick broke. He ran toward the place Mason had vanished, firing his rifle from the hip. Come out! I shouted his name. Bram tried to catch him. Patrick disappeared between the trees. His rifle fired twice. Once. Then silence. Then something threw him back into the clearing. He hit the ground near Tessa with a wet crack. His chest was crushed inward. His face was still alive for 3 seconds. His mouth opened. Blood came out. Then Patrick's soul died staring at the trees where his dog had died before him. That was when we finally saw enough of it to understand we had never been hunting a man. At the edge of the clearing, something stood behind the spruce. Not fully visible. Never fully visible. It kept the trees between us like it understood fear better than we did. I saw a long gray-black shoulder. A hand too large for any human hand curling around the trunk. Not a paw. A hand. The fingers were long, ending in dark hooked claws. Then the head leaned out. Only halfway. A canine muzzle. Wet black nose. Lips pulled back from teeth that looked too crowded for its mouth. Eyes pale as frozen creek water. And ears high on the skull. Pointed. Listening. It was taller than Bram. Taller than any man I had ever seen. But it was not standing like a bear. It stood like a person pretending not to be one. Avery whispered, Dogman. The word sounded childish. Ridiculous. Something from campfire stories and bad internet videos. Then the thing smiled with a mouth full of meat, and the word became the only one that fit. Bram fired first. His rifle thundered. The creature jerked behind the tree. Bark exploded. Nolan fired. I fired. June pulled Tessa down and covered her. We put more than a dozen rounds into that tree line. When the smoke cleared, the creature was gone. No body. No blood trail. Only one strip of black hair caught in the bark. And deep in the forest, Mason Reed's voice whispered, Elias. I grabbed Tessa and pulled her upright. We're leaving. Nobody argued. We ran. Not fast. You cannot run fast through Alaskan backcountry with a half-frozen survivor, deadfall, rocks, mud, and panic tearing at your legs. But we moved. Down Wolf Ladder. Across the creek. Past Claire's body. Past Dorian's body. Past the place where Riggs had died. The forest moved with us. That is the only way I can describe it. Branches shook where nothing visible passed. Snow fell from trees ahead of us. Something paced us on the ridgeline. Sometimes on 2 feet. Sometimes on 4. Sometimes close enough that I heard it breathing. Tessa kept whispering, Don't answer it. Don't answer it. Then my radio crackled. My own voice came through. Team 3, stop moving. Everyone froze. The voice continued. This is Ranger Elias Voss. Stop moving. You are heading into danger. Avery stared at me. I lifted my hands away from my radio. I was not transmitting. The false voice sounded exactly like me. Not close. Exact. It had my tiredness, my rhythm, even the slight rasp I got in cold weather. Nolan looked ready to shoot the radio. The voice said, "June is infected. Shoot her before she changes." June's eyes widened. Bram turned toward her. "Don't," I warned him. The radio hissed. My voice laughed softly. "Bram already knows." Bram's rifle shifted. Only an inch. But fear notices inches. Nolan saw it too. "Lower it, Holt." Bram's jaw worked. "She said we were carrying it." "She meant fear," I said. But Bram was no longer listening to sense. The forest had entered him through his ears. The radio spoke again, this time in Riggs's broken scream. Bram shouted and fired into the trees. The shot deafened us. Something answered from the slope above. A roar. Not a wolf. Not a bear. Not anything I had been trained to name. It hit the ravine walls and came back larger. Bram ran. Not away from danger. Not toward safety. Just away from what his mind could no longer hold. He plunged downhill through alder and vanished. We heard him crashing through brush. Then we heard him stop. Then we heard him say very calmly, "Mom." A wet impact followed. Then another. Then something dragged him through the undergrowth while he screamed so hard his voice tore apart. We did not go after him. I still dream about that. But we did not go after him. By then, there were 4 of us left. Me, June, Nolan, Avery, and Tessa barely walking between us. The trailhead was less than 2 miles away. 2 miles is nothing on a good day. In Crail Pass, with that thing behind us, it became another country. The light began to fail. Rain turned to sleet. The trees darkened. Every shadow grew legs. We reached an old emergency shelter just before dusk. It was a small log structure built decades earlier for trapped hikers. 1 room. Iron stove. 2 bunks. 1 window. 1 door. I had inspected it in July. Back then, the latch had worked. Now the door stood open. Inside, the walls were covered in scratches. From floor to ceiling. Thousands of them. Some old. Some fresh. In the center of the room lay Mason Reed's head. Nothing else. Just the head. Placed neatly on the stove. Avery made a sound like she was choking. Nolan backed out immediately. "No. We keep moving." But Tessa collapsed in the doorway. Her body had reached its limit. June checked her pulse. She can't continue without heat. Nolan looked at the darkening forest. "We stay here, we die." I looked at the scratches. "We go out there in the dark, we die faster." So we barricaded the door with the bunks. We covered the window with a metal shelf. We lit the stove with emergency tinder. Nobody looked at Mason's head after I wrapped it in a tarp and placed it outside. That was a mistake. I should have left nothing outside for it to use. Night came down hard. The shelter filled with smoke, wet wool, blood, and fear. Tessa lay near the stove, shaking. June cleaned a cut on Avery's cheek. Nolan sat facing the door with his shotgun across his knees. I watched the window. For 1 hour, nothing happened. That was the worst hour, because imagination does not rest. It builds teeth in the dark. Then something knocked on the door. 3 slow knocks. Human rhythm. Nolan raised the shotgun. Nobody breathed. A voice outside said, "Elias?" It was Bram. Weak. Shivering. Alive. "Open the door, man. Please." Avery started crying again. June whispered, "No." Bram coughed outside. I got away. "I'm hurt bad." Nolan looked at me. His face begged me to make the decision, so he would not have to carry it. I moved close to the door. "Bram," I said, "what did you call me at the station yesterday?" Silence. Then Bram said, "Open the door." "What did you call me?" The thing outside breathed against the wood. When it spoke again, it used my father's voice. My father had been dead for 11 years. "Eli, don't leave me in the cold." My knees nearly failed. I had not told anyone on that team my father called me Eli. The voice softened. "I'm proud of you, son." June touched my shoulder. "Elias, don't." I stepped back from the door. The thing outside began to scratch. Slowly at first. 1 claw dragging down the wood. Then another. Then all 5. The sound filled the shelter. Avery covered her ears. Tessa opened her eyes and whispered, "It hates closed doors." The scratching stopped. Something moved around the cabin. We heard it past the window. The covered window went black. Not dark. Black. Something was standing directly outside it, sniffing. The metal shelf over the window bent inward slightly. Nolan aimed. I shook my head. The sniffing stopped. Then the thing whispered through the wall in Claire's voice. Perfect stories attract attention. I went cold, because that was something I had once said, years earlier, after a poacher investigation, in private, to one person, my old supervisor, dead now. June saw my face. What? It shouldn't know that. The wall creaked. The roof groaned. It was climbing. We followed the sound above us. Heavy steps crossed the roof beams. Dust fell. Then claws punched through the logs overhead. One hand entered. Long fingers spread. The claws flexed in the smoky air. Nolan fired upward. The hand vanished. A roar shook the shelter. The roof exploded inward. Logs cracked. Sleet poured through. A black shape dropped halfway into the room, huge and fast and wrong. I saw its face fully then. God help me, I saw it. Not a wolf. Not a dog. Not a man. A long, brutal muzzle slick with blood. Eyes too intelligent. A chest like a starved bear. Arms hanging almost to the knees. Fur matted with mud, snow, and pieces of things it had killed. It landed on Nolan. He fired once before it took his arm. The shotgun blast tore into the wall. The creature bit down at his shoulder and shook him like cloth. Nolan's scream became a gurgle. I fired into its side. June fired too. Avery grabbed Tessa and dragged her toward the broken door. The thing dropped Nolan and turned toward us. For the first time, it stopped hiding. It unfolded to its full height inside that ruined shelter. Its head scraped the broken roof beam. 8 feet. Maybe more. It looked at me. Not at the group. At me. Then it spoke in my voice. We're leaving. I shot it in the mouth. The round punched through its cheek. Black blood hit the stove and hissed. The creature staggered. June threw the stove door open with her sleeve wrapped around her hand. I understood instantly. I kicked the fuel canister toward her. She poured stove fuel across the floor between us and the creature. Avery screamed from the doorway. Move. June struck a flare. The red light painted the creature's face. For 1 second, it looked almost surprised. Then June dropped the flare. Fire climbed the floor. The creature lunged through it. Its fur caught. The smell was unbearable. Burning hair. Rot. Blood. Something older. June shoved me through the doorway as the creature hit her. I fell into the snow outside. Avery dragged Tessa away. I rolled over and saw June in the doorway, both hands gripping the creature's lower jaw, holding it back with impossible strength for one final second. Run, she shouted. Then the creature pulled her inside. The shelter became fire. June did not scream long. We ran. There were only 3 of us now. Me, Avery, and Tessa. Behind us, the shelter burned orange against the black trees. The Dogman came out of the fire. Burning. Still alive. Still walking. Its fur smoked. One side of its face hung open where my bullet had torn it. Flames crawled along its shoulder and back. It dropped to all 4s and came after us. Fast. Too fast for something that size. The trailhead was close. I could smell the road before I saw it. Gravel, oil, old exhaust. Avery was sobbing with each breath. Tessa had gone limp, and I was half carrying her. The thing gained on us. Branches snapped behind me. Its breath came in wet bursts. I knew we would not make it, so I stopped. Avery shouted my name. I pushed Tessa into her arms. Go. No. Go. I turned toward the trees with my last flare and my rifle. The Dogman slowed. It understood. That was the worst thing about it. Not the teeth. Not the blood. The understanding. It stepped from the dark onto the trail. Burned. Bleeding. Smiling. I lit the flare. Red fire filled the rain. The creature tilted its head. I raised my rifle. It spoke in June's voice. Because everything else knows more than we do. For a moment, I almost lowered the gun. Not because I believed it was June. Because grief is stupid. Because grief wants the dead back even when they return with teeth. Then I saw Avery and Tessa reach the trailhead behind it. The truck lights flashed as Avery found the spare key hidden beneath the Ranger truck's rear bumper. The engine turned. The Dogman heard it. Its head snapped toward them. I fired. Once. Twice. 3 times. The third shot hit its wounded cheek. It screamed and came at me. I did not run. There was nowhere to run that mattered. I waited until it leapt. Then I dropped backward off the trail into Blackjaw Creek. The creek was swollen from rain and snowmelt. Cold hit me like a hammer. The Dogman landed where I had stood, claws tearing mud. I slammed into rocks, went under, surfaced, went under again. The current took me. Above the roar of water, I heard the creature running along the bank, keeping pace, waiting for a place to reach me. My rifle was gone. The flare was gone. My hands were numb. I hit a fallen log and nearly broke my ribs. The current forced me under it. For 3 seconds, I was trapped beneath black water. When I came up, I was in a pool below the old logging bridge. The trailhead lights were distant above. The Dogman stood on the bridge, burning less now, watching me. It could have come down. It could have finished it. Instead, it lifted its head and listened. Sirens. Far away. Avery had reached the emergency channel in the truck. The creature looked toward the sound. Then back at me. It opened its ruined mouth. This time it used my own voice again. Not from the radio. Not through static. Directly. Perfectly. Any bears out there? Then it turned and walked into the trees. On 2 legs. I was found 40 minutes later half frozen on the creek bank. Avery and Tessa survived. Tessa never gave an official statement that made sense. She said there had been a bear, then a man, then a wolf, then Mason, then no one. Avery quit rescue work and moved south within a month. Nolan, June, Patrick, Bram, Mason, Claire, and Dorian were listed as killed by wildlife and exposure during a severe backcountry incident. That is what the report says. Wildlife and exposure. Clean words. Safe words. Words people can sleep beside. I signed the report. I told myself it was mercy. I told myself nobody would believe the truth. I told myself the dead did not need the world laughing at what killed them. But every September the calls still come. Missing hikers. Lost hunters. Dogs refusing trails. Moose found open from throat to belly. Bears discovered with their skulls crushed against trees. And sometimes, from the Creepypasta repeater, the radio catches voices that should not exist. A woman asking for help. A man laughing. A dog screaming. A ranger saying, "Stay on the trail." I left Alaska 3 years ago. I live in a warm place now. No spruce trees. No glaciers. No long dark valleys. But last winter, I woke at 3:17 in the morning because something scratched my front door. 5 slow lines. From top to bottom. Too high for a man. Too deep for a dog. I stood in the hallway until dawn with a pistol in my hand. I did not open the door. At sunrise, I found a strip of black hair caught in the wood. And beneath it, pressed carefully on my welcome mat, was my old ranger badge. The one I had lost in Blackjaw Creek. There was blood on it. Not old blood. Fresh. I called the police. They found no footprints. No animal tracks. No sign of forced entry. The officer asked if I had enemies. I almost laughed. Enemies are human. This is worse. Because now I understand something I did not understand in Creepypasta. The Dogman was not protecting its territory. It was not hunting for food. It was learning us. Our voices. Our fear. Our guilt. Our dead. And once it learns you, distance becomes another story people tell themselves so they can sleep. Last night, my radio turned on by itself. I have not owned a Ranger radio in 3 years. Static filled the room. Then June Mercer's voice whispered through the speaker. "Elias." I did not answer. Then my father's voice said, "Open the door, Eli." I did not move. Finally, after a long silence, my own voice came through. Soft. Patient. Almost kind. "We're leaving." Outside my window, something laughed in the snow.